This is an introduction to automation. We're probably going to spend about 20 minutes going over some of the theoretical stuff that you'll need to know. And then we'll spend the rest of the time. Hopefully, this will become sort of an interactive, engaging back and forth. So as I'm going through this, please try to think of some things that you'd like to see maybe as an example, or if you have real, actual things that you're dealing with as an investor or a business owner of any other kind. Be thinking about those things. And then at some point, I'm going to ask for requests to see if we can build like certain kinds of automations together in a microcosm. So that's what I would like to do. So let's get into some of this theory. So when we talk about automation, that's a very broad word, right? It can range from the general economic situation that came out of the Industrial Revolution. That's a little bit more broad than the way that people in this field tend to refer to it. Sometimes people will refer to automation as anything related to having like people with certain roles and how those roles interact. What we're focusing on is a specific kind of narrow part of automation that's with respect to kind of doing things when other things happen and mutating information as it passes through a chain, right? So let's say you're a business that wants to send somebody a text message every day with what the weather is, right? Obviously, weather apps exist for that, but you could do that kind of thing and start a business doing that with some fairly simple automations. So automation in this context, it will save you time by reducing the repetitive tasks that you have to do. It also will reduce human error when it works, and that's a big win. And it ensures consistency in how your data kind of comes through to whatever system you want it to be in. This is also a good way to scale up your workflow. So whatever your process is, maybe you're putting together a deal, you're trying to market that deal, or whatever else you're doing, it allows you to vertically scale up your capacity to do a particular thing without really needing a whole lot of extra resources. It's also, when you start thinking of things in terms of automation, it's going to change your internal sense of what you can accomplish in a good way. There's a light to be seen here in kind of an enlightenment way. And when you see that light, the world of possibility and competitive advantages will reveal itself to you. That's an assertion I present to you to judge if you think it's right. And luckily with this automation stuff, it kind of follows an 80-20 rule, right? So if you don't know, the 80-20 rule is that 80% of your results come from 20% of your efforts. So automation, when you know how to do it, will help you focus on the 20% of those tasks that will yield the most impact. And you can automate away sort of the rest, right? So you use automation for things that are good candidates to be automated and reserve yourself for things that humans have to do, like going to appointments. So when is something worth automating? When it would be a simple task to do manually, but you have to do it very often, right? There's this kind of ongoing debate in this space that people are unsure where to draw the line. Like, if you can automate a task that will save you 3 hours a day and it takes you a week to do, well, that's very likely worth automating. But if it's something you have to do like once a month and it only takes you 5 minutes each time, it's probably not worth automating, right? So there's a line to be drawn about when something is worth automating. You kind of have to use your own judgment for that. There's also something to be said for not trying to automate too early. I have this conversation a lot with real estate investors that say they're in the off-market space and they want to do the tax delinquent game, right? That's a lead source, and they want to go big with that. And they haven't even done a tax delinquent deal before. They haven't even found the websites that they need to go to pull those tax delinquents. They haven't really tested it out. And so when I'm talking to investors that want to automate a part of their business that they haven't done before, I encourage them to try it out by hand first. Make sure you can do it before you invest the time and resources into automating it. Okay, so let's go over some concepts that are going to be helpful to know when we get into automation. These are going to sort of go up in terms of difficulty to comprehend, but when you really understand all these concepts, you're going to know how to automate stuff. So a workflow, also called an automation. This is a sequence of tasks that are triggered by some event, and they execute in order to do something. And I know that sounds very broad. We can harden that definition out with some examples. But if you paid attention to what I just said there, I said triggers and in tasks, right? So a trigger is anything that initiates a workflow. This could be something like getting an email from a particular person, getting a submission on like a form that you have on a website. Those are the trigger events. Those are the things that kick off the chain of actions. And then the actions or tasks, they are like operations that are performed after that trigger happens, right? So that could be sending an email. You get a form, you send an email, right? That would be a workflow. That would be an automation. The trigger is that you get the form submission, and the action is that you send an email. So we'll get into some more examples of that. Now, when I start showing you some of these real life examples of automations and scripts, you're going to see that in every single one, there's a trigger, and then there's a series of actions. And sometimes these actions will split and branch and then recombine. So like, if I wanted to set up a workflow that sent me an email every time the weather, the high temperature for today was 75, I could do that. The trigger would be every day, check the weather. And if the weather is 75, send an email, right? So you can have conditional logic within your workflows. Another concept to, you don't have to fully understand this one, but just know that this exists, is an API. An API is short for application programming interface. And it's a fairly complicated way to say the way in which websites will make themselves available to other programs, right? So when you're interacting with a website, you're on Zillow, for example. It is giving you information that can be retrieved by a computer, but Zillow internally doesn't want you to be able to maybe access all the website features automatically or whatever, and it's difficult to do it that way. So they provide what are called APIs. APIs are versions of any kind of software that you might use that make itself available to other pieces of software that exist, and they can connect to each other and start to combine into this kind of network of interconnected systems. Another concept is an HTTP request. This is how you can retrieve information from an API. So there's an API for the weather, like I said, provided by the government. And they say, if you send us an HTTP request with a certain setup, then we'll send you back the weather information that we have for that place. So the way in which we reach out to these APIs is through HTTP requests. There's some caveat to that, but that's the kind of universal way that this happens. The next concept is a webhook. And I promise you don't need to actually know these ones that I'm saying, but if you do get your head around them, they will make you much better at automating things. A webhook is basically something provided by your service that you're trying to work with that gives you a means to send and receive data from that service to other systems, right? So in my work, I'm using a form builder called Cognito Forms. And Cognito Forms will give me the ability to put in a website that every time a form is submitted, it sends a message to that website. And then that website is something I control, and I can take that form submission and do something with it. So webhooks are ways to retrieve information from websites in real time, which is really how you'd like to generally receive them. In the old days, webhooks weren't as ubiquitous. And so what we had to rely on, and you might still have to rely on this, is something called polling. Polling is like that annoying kid in the back of your car that keeps saying, "Are we there yet?" Right? It's hitting you constantly with questions. Hey, are we there yet? Hey, are we there yet? Now, if the service that you're working with doesn't have a webhook, polling is really the way that you have to get that data. So an example of this is like Google Sheets. They recently introduced the ability to set up webhooks, which would give you instantaneous data, maybe when a row was added or something like that. So old school automation systems basically are checking that spreadsheet every 15, 20 minutes to see if there's been a change and then doing something depending on that change. So that's called polling. It's when you keep checking for changes or updates in the source that you're trying to check. And so you can have delays of up to 15 minutes if you're using a polling system to check for a change. The last vocab word here is scraping. So this is a contentious issue. Scraping in the United States is legal. There are Supreme Court rulings indicating such, but there's an arms race right now between people who want to scrape data in the websites that are being scraped. But basically the way scraping works is that you will go to that website and it's all robotic, but it's pretending to be a human and retrieving information from those websites that the websites don't actually want to provide. This is the last resort when you want to scrape data. So if you have an example like Airbnb, right? Airbnb doesn't provide you with any APIs or webhooks that you can use to scan their listings page. The only way to get that information, because they're trying to keep it secure, is to scrape their website. So that's what you can do when an API is not available. That's a little bit out of the scope of this lesson, but I wanted to tell you, like, just because you don't see an API or a webhook that you can use for what you're trying to do, scraping is always a last resort. Okay, so let's talk about some of the platforms that exist for setting up these automations. Most of you have probably heard of Zapier. Zapier is probably the easiest to get started with. You don't have to really know a whole lot about automation to build stuff in Zapier. You don't need to know how to write code. And it probably has the broadest support for apps, right? So I actually don't have any total verification for this, but I do think Zapier has the most apps on it, right? So you want to connect your Google Sheets to your email, you can do that in Zapier. The problem with Zapier is that it can become expensive. The way that they price their automations are based on how many actions happen. And that can get expensive, and they're also just generally more expensive. And they also lack some more advanced features. Like branching logic is difficult to pull off in Zapier. But most automations don't need much more than a single series of tasks. The next is called Make. It used to be called Integromat. It's a bit of an upgrade over Zapier in some ways. It's cheaper. It's still, you don't need to be a programmer. It has support for better routing options like conditional logic and loops. The big thing for me that makes me use Make when I want a quick and easy automation solution is that they have webhook responses. Basically, it's hard to explain how that's helpful, but it's something that you get out of Make that you don't get out of Zapier, and it makes it better supported with a lot of other apps. They actually probably have fewer overall connections compared to Zapier, but of the connections that they do have, you can do a lot with. It's more complex than Zapier, and that can be overwhelming if you're just getting into this. So stick to Zapier when you're just getting started. The last that actually a couple that I mentioned here. One is Pipedream. This is a relatively new app. It's meant for developers. So if you're a programmer, I would just start with Pipedream because it's meant for developers. It's basically you have this automation editor, and it's very cheap, and you can write code inside of Pipedream, and then it does all the cool cloud stuff to make sure that that's always on. And it's meant for developers. So it's also probably the cheapest. There's a couple of other options. I'm actually going to skip them, but there are open source options for this. If you're willing to self-host, you can automate your stuff more or less for free. And then kind of the end game here is to do it yourself. Most common programming languages have a means to set up what's called a web service. That operates a bit like a website, but you can send and receive information between systems using these web services. And then on top of all that, a lot of the systems that you would want to use do provide their own automation systems. I use Go High Level quite a lot. If you've been in real estate for a while, you've probably heard that name. It's probably the biggest CRM for real estate investors right now. They have their own internal automation suite. And so you can use stuff internally when the time calls for it. That's probably the cleanest way to do it. And then if you have to rely on third-party automations, then you can do that. So automating outreach. Yeah, so this is probably what you're going to want to automate. Sending text messages, sending emails, sending any kind of other things. Like maybe you want to automate a mail campaign, that kind of thing. So like I mentioned, I use Go High Level. Yeah, I'll go to my Go High Level account. So the company I work with is called 3Doors. This is the CRM that we use in Go High Level. If I go into one of the divisions that we have, so if you don't know already, a CRM, it's short for customer relationship manager. Go High Level is let's set up an automation. I'm going to go to the automation section and Go High Level, and they call them workflows. So if I create a workflow and let's say start from scratch here, you'll see that there are triggers and actions, just like I talked about. This is generally the anatomy of pretty much any workflow. So the first thing it wants me to do is pick a trigger. And if you can see on the right side, this is providing a list of all the triggers. This is actually fairly standard as far as most automation systems go. You can see all the possible events that we can trigger based on. Is there a birthday coming up? We can trigger based on that. Did a contact get created? This is probably the one that we would end up using. Did a contact get tagged with a certain tag? I could also use that one. There's all kinds of other events. We talked about webhooks. An inbound webhook makes this kind of thing a lot more versatile. Forms submitted, all kinds of other stuff. So what I'm probably going to do here is set it up based on a contact tag. And then I can specify, usually this automation stuff will give you the ability to add additional filters onto things. The filter has to be that a tag was added and that the tag is, and then one of these things. So I'm going to use my tired landlord tag here and then save the trigger. Now, anytime a contact within Go High Level gets added a tag that says tired landlord, they're going to be enrolled into this workflow. And then all of the steps that we do from here are going to follow. Now, with Go High Level, I've already hooked up our Go High Level to a Twilio phone number. If you don't know, Twilio is basically like the biggest online sending and receiving text messaging calls service for applications. So most of the time when you're getting a text message from somebody that's not sending it from their phone, odds are it's going through something like Twilio. Now, there have been a huge number of changes in the way that this used to happen. You might remember something called an RVM, which is a way in which people would do what seemed to be leaving a voicemail on your phone without it having looked like you missed a call or rang. It didn't work very well, but it was effective for a while. It kind of took advantage of the way that most phones handle getting 2 calls straight in a row. Usually it would send the second call to voicemail. So it would dial you from the phone number, and then from another phone number, dial like half a second later. And then once the first one got the voicemail, the second one would it would go straight to voicemail, and then it would leave the message on the second one. Crazy kind of hack there. And then the person would see, oh, I got a a new voicemail. But they would sometimes not see the initial phone call because they would hang up as soon as the voicemail started. So yeah, that was something for a while. But we're just going to do something simple. We're going to do a text message. So I'm going to send a text message, and my message is going to be, hey, loser, can I buy your house? Well, not really. In practice, obviously, you wouldn't want to say that. You would actually probably want to use maybe like the first name of the person that came in. So in Go High Level, I can feed in the first name of the person by clicking this little tag, going to contact, and then first name. And then now I have a text message that's going to dynamically say, hey, first name, can I buy your house? So if I hit save here, hit save. Now, whenever somebody gets added to the system and they're tagged as a tired landlord, they're going to get this text message. But if you've ever looked into the effectiveness of marketing, especially when it comes to text and calls, it tends to be the case that your response rate on your initial message is pretty bad. It tends to go up the more times you call somebody, the more times you hit somebody. So how can we ensure that we hit them multiple times? Well, most automation systems give you a means to put the workflow on pause for some amount of time. So in Go High Level, the way this manifests itself is as a wait step. So the action here is wait, and then I could say wait 1 day, save, and then I could send an email. I could make a cold call, but we'll just do another text message to keep it simple. So I could say, hey, are you there? And then hit save. So this is a very basic workflow. Our trigger is based on a contact in the system getting tagged appropriately. We send a text message immediately. We wait a day. We send another text message. You can probably see where this is going. You just keep doing this over and over. Send a text message, wait, send a text message, wait, over and over and over. And you can pull this off with most automation systems. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to publish my workflow, and I'm going to save it. And one cool thing about Go High Level is that they have some controls over these kinds of marketing messages. So allow reentry. This setting will allow the contact to get put into this workflow multiple times. When I'm sending a marketing campaign, I actually don't want that to happen. I don't want them to get the same message loop twice in a row. And stop on response is really powerful. This takes them out of the workflow if they call you back, or they text you back, or they reply to your email. And so you can use that to get somebody out of the workflow. So changing those settings around, and then now we can actually test it. To tag myself as a retired landlord. So if I say tired landlord, it's going to throw me into that automation. It's probably already happened. And we can see on the right side here, this is one cool thing about Go High Level. It tracks all of your text messages to and from. It looks like iMessage. And so I can see here, I just got this text message, and you probably couldn't see that, but my phone just lit up with the new text message too. So guess what's going to happen next? It's going to wait 1 day and send me another text message, right? So now, how do you do this in bulk, right? You might already know based on what we've been talking about here, but if you want to send text messages to people in bulk, if I can upload a list into my CRM and then all at once tag them as a tired landlord, they're all going to get put into this sequence. So if you are doing something clever and you find that, okay, for me to close my create a finance deal, I have to send about 8 text messages to each person that I have in my spreadsheet before they respond to me, before my response rate starts to go up a bit. Well, instead of just using the spreadsheet to track all that, take your spreadsheet, upload it into a system like Go High Level, create a workflow that is triggered based on a tag or something like that, and then set up your series of messages. And at that point, you can throw them all in bulk. And this is a CRM. This is very CRM specific what I'm talking about, but this general approach does work across CRMs. You can do this kind of thing in Podio, HubSpot, Salesforce, Pipedrive, all kinds of cool stuff like that. So add a list, trigger it based on a certain thing, perform that certain thing in bulk if you can, and then now you're automatically following up with your leads. So that's an example, hopefully, that sufficiently shows how you could do this kind of thing, Brent. That I know some of this is pretty specific to Go High Level, and we didn't talk about like Zapier or anything like that, but let me just show you guys what Zapier looks like. So I was playing around with this earlier. Let me just show you what Zapier looks like, because I think many of you are probably going to start with Zapier. So once you're logged into Zapier, they do have a free plan. It's not very good, but it is there. So you can play around with this stuff without committing money. I hit create, and we'll see something that looks almost exactly like what we just saw in Go High Level. We have triggers and we have actions, and we even have the plus button in a row. right? So I can trigger an event, and this is just some of the 7,000 apps, in each one with its own series of triggers that we can work with. Say I get a message on Slack, and I want to send a message to Slack, or I get an email and I want to send a text message to myself, or I have an event coming up in Google Calendar and I want to send a reminder text to myself. You can do all these kinds of things with Zapier alone. So I'm going to pause there and just kind of get some feedback, and if anyone has any other kinds of suggestions for things to look at. A lot of this automation stuff comes down to knowing what is out there. And that's just really a matter of digging for the most part. But it would be almost the same process. So there's a service called lob.com, lob.com. And this will allow you to send physical mail about as easily as you can send emails. And all of the automation benefits that come along with that, right? So with Lob, and I actually have never used Lob myself. I've been looking for a good reason to. I can create a letter template within Lob, and then go over to Zapier and say, hey, send a letter based on some event happening, right? So let's say I'm doing a wedding or something like that, and I have a registration form for potential attendees. And after they register, I want to automatically send them a piece of mail with like driving directions or something like that. I don't know, that's probably not an automation you'd actually want, but I could set up in Zapier a trigger based on receiving an email. So let's do mail, and it should give me the option. Actually, I'll just do Gmail specifically. So if I use the Gmail app as a trigger, let's look at some of these events that we have available to us. We get a new email. I star an email. A new thread starts, whatever that means. I get a new attachment, right? I could take these attachments and automatically upload them to some other system. So I could say when I get a new email, and right now, the first time you do this, it's going to ask you to connect an account. Right now, it's connected to my Offer REI account, but let me just show you what this would look like. If I hit connect a new account, it's going to load up the on my computer the accounts that I have within Gmail, and I can pick one. But I'm going to keep it on my Offer REI one. So then I hit continue, and I can specify which email specifically I care about. So I could say when I receive a new email to my inbox, and then hit continue. When I hit test trigger, it's actually going to go to my email, look for an example email to use. So we'll use this email C here. And then this is where things can get a little bit dicey. We can ignore this for now, but this is all the information that it's pulling out of that email. It's pulling the headers, who it came from, what the subject was, what the body of the email was. So I'm going to hit continue with selected record, and now it's going to use that one for testing in the later steps. So what we were talking about, sending letters. So I don't know if Lob is in here. Let's see. Yeah, it is. Okay, cool. So on the action step, I just searched on the top, Lob, and then I can click on it. Now, I don't actually have a Lob account, but I don't think I need one for the sake of this example. Let's look at some of the action events that exist for Lob. Send letter, send postcard, verify an address. So to Ariel's question, if I wanted to send a postcard, boom, I hit send postcard. Now at this point, I'd have to connect my account and tell Zapier which postcard do I want to send, and probably pass along any information that I would want to. And since I don't have a Lob account, I'm not going to be able to do that at this moment. But when I turn this on, and notice how long it took me, even through explaining all this, setting this up. Another, actually probably a better trigger for this would be with a Google Sheet, right? So let's say they go through a form, and if you use Google Forms, it automatically throws their submissions into a Google Sheet for you. Then I can connect it to my Google Sheets. I can pick one of these events, new or updated spreadsheet row. You'll see that this one is instant. If we go back to the vocabulary words that I shared with you, webhooks allow these things to be instant, but polling does not. Polling will check every 2 to 15 minutes for an update, but instant ones, they're based on webhooks. And so if I hit new or updated row, and then I'll have to pick an account, it looks like. I've got to reconnect this one. Let's do that just for these. Yeah, it's it's well worth everyone's time. Like if you're at the stage now where you're just like keeping track of your leads based on just what Coffee Closers gives you, or maybe you have a Google Sheet or something like that, that helps you keep on top of your stuff. I would say keep doing that until you get your first deal. It'll be sooner than you think. And afterwards, once you kind of have a fully, built out mental model of what the process is of getting a deal, then you can introduce these automations, and really kind of scale that up and decrease the amount of time that you spend. But you don't know what to automate until you have until you've actually been to the finish line on a particular process, really. So, okay, it looks like we're in good shape. I can then, with this Google Sheet trigger, I can pick a specific spreadsheet, right? So we're talking about affiliates. I could click on those potential affiliates. And then I can specify which sheet I'm looking for. So I've got a list of Facebook groups in here. And I can even look for specific changes on specific columns. Although for some reason it didn't seem to like it on this one. That's fine. Oh, I know why. It's actually because the header row isn't being used. But then I hit continue. And then if I hit test trigger, it's actually going to go to that spreadsheet and find me an example of somebody that's in the list. So let's see what's on C here. It's not going to show up with me. That's fine. So now what I've got here is a system where every time a row gets added to a Google Sheet, it's going to send a postcard based on what's in that Google Sheet, right? So if I've got a spreadsheet and I've got like name, mailing address, that's all I need to send these postcards. And it's actually going to use the information from the updated Google Sheet, spreadsheet row, to send off the postcard. So if this doesn't like produce, boundless creativity in your minds for kind of the crazy stuff you can do, then maybe I've done a poor job of explaining what's going on here. But yeah, that's one such example. Just to give you a sense of a very simple automation. But yeah, that's how I could send a postcard. Trigger based on whatever I can think I would want to trigger it on, and then send a postcard using a service like Lob. I want to show you guys a real example using Make, which is similar to Zapier, but it's a little bit more advanced. This is the process that we go through. So one of our divisions at Three Doors, the one that does lease options, it's called HomeWays. And we get leads from like two different sources, the Zillow rental manager and TurboTenant. So let's look at the Zillow Convo leads. This is a workflow in Make. You'll see it actually looks a little bit different. It's still a sequential thing, but this one's a little bit more complicated. Now, the trigger here is what's called a mail hook. Basically, what's happening here is that Make has provided a special email address that I can connect to Zillow and say, hey, send all of your messages to this email, instead of sending it directly to mine. And so whenever an email hits this mailbox, Make is going to start this process. Now, the reason we have to do that, if I pull up, you may have seen me show this to you before. This is the inbox that we use as a company for the lease option division. We have this new leads folder. And if you look at the date in which we're receiving emails here, it's tremendous. We're getting many dozens a day of people that are interested in our lease option properties. This is not something you'd want to have to transfer over by hand. These guys are we want to put them into a CRM, right? So let's look at this one. TurboTenant says Carrie is interested in 19 Knollwood Court, right? But notice this email. How much information are we getting about Carrie? We know their first name. We know the address they're interested in. And then the email body itself just says Carrie's interested in your property. We really don't get any details about them. We get their name and the property. We don't get their email address. We don't get their phone number. We don't get their last name. Let's look at another example. Let's see if I can find one from Zillow. Most of these are actually from Zillow. Yeah, here's an example. Asha is requesting information about this other address. Asha says, I'd like to schedule a tour. Do any of these dates work for you? So we don't actually get a whole lot of great information here. So one thing that I can do, one big problem here is figuring out what are the address components, right? And what are the name components, right? Zillow is not saying the first name is Asha, the last name is Roth. I have to piece together what the name is based on the information and the order that it comes in with the email. What if this said Asha V. Roth? Well, now it would be hard. I'd have a hard time picking apart what the first name is from the last name because now I've got a middle name to deal with. This is a really great chore to pass off to ChatGPT. So when we get an email like this, the first thing that happens is I ask ChatGPT to go into this email and identify the pieces of information that I have a hard time figuring out myself. So the specific prompt that I use is extract the first and last name of the person from this text. The first name will normally be first and the last name would normally be second. The name will normally be near the word says in the text. I'm telling ChatGPT, like, the word that you should kind of pivot this search on is the word says. We also want to extract the message that was sent. It should be right after the word says. So this is kind of how I'm structuring my my message to ChatGPT, and then I can tell it, I want you to send me back a first name, and that's going to be the first name of the person, and that's going to be text. Here are some examples of first names. I want you to retrieve the last name. Here are some examples of some common last names. I also want to get the message that the client sent, normally after says, but before the reply button. So I'm kind of telling it where to search. And then once it does this, it's going to get all this information for me. And I also generate a random number. I can get into why, but and then I create a contact in Go High Level. And when I create this contact, with most CRMs, you have to provide at least an email or a phone number, but I have yet to get a real email or phone number out of these emails. So the reply to email is just from Zillow. So that's what's going into the CRM as an email. And the first and last name are what I pulled out of ChatGPT. And I also set my tag as a tenant buyer. And guess what this tag does? It throws them into a workflow to immediately start following up with them and nurturing them. And now I've got a pipeline where somebody fills out a form on TurboTenant or Zillow, and it ends up in my CRM. So this is a very practical workflow, and that's something that we use in our company.